welcome to the Podcast Discovery Show, the podcast about other podcasts. Where each week we dive deep into a podcast. We have discussions about all the things the podcast made us think about and usually get off on tangents along the way. I'm Josh.
I'm Kirk.
And I am Zach.
And this week we're here to talk to you about Ologies. So we are going to go back and revisit Ologies because it's just one of those podcasts that's become part of my listening rotation. I listen to a lot of the episodes, and I've just, every single time I listen to an episode, I'm blown away with how interesting and how good it is. So I've just had to recommend another one after I listened to the episode specifically on fungi or fungi with Dr. Tom Volk. And it is just absolutely phenomenal. So a couple of the other episodes I've listened to that I've really loved, one on postcards, I think it was Deltology or Deletology. It sounds so boring, but you listen to it and you want postcards. Like I mentioned this in the last episode, it's super, super interesting. And there's one on crow funerals. And I listened to one this week on gaming. It's called Ludology. And they have this professor named Dr. Jane McGonigal. And she is
really, like, for real, that's her name? Yeah,
like Professor McGonagall from Harry Potter.
That is amazing.
Yeah, she said people pronounce her name correctly now, and they never did in the past. But I highly recommend, if you like this episode, to go and check out anything or everything that looks interesting. Or I almost challenge you to look at something that seems boring and listen to the episode and be surprised at how interested you are in it by the end. It's just such an amazing show. Her energy is amazing. I have nothing but good things to say about this show.
Yeah, I want to listen to the one about paleontology, saurology, which is lizards, which it reminds me of Sauron. So I wonder if they got,
I like how you went Sauron and not dinosaur.
No, like
dinosaur.
Paleontology is for dinosaurs, but saurology is lizards.
Yeah, no, what I'm saying is dinosaur.
Dinosaurs.
Yeah.
Like dinosaurs. Yep. No, but
dinosaurs and police cars, my two favorite things.
Pretty much. So yeah, I hadn't been listening to Ologies again, but after listening to another episode, I'm right there with you where every single time I've heard this show, first of all, Alie Ward is hilarious. So funny, such a good host. And yeah, she finds people that are so passionate about weird niche topics, but it makes them super interesting because of how passionate they are about them and how willing they are to talk about things and bring it down to a level where people can appreciate it because they want people to be a part of what they're passionate about.
Yeah. And like, speaking of her, like, we listened to the first one that we did and it was great and everything, but listening to this one, I'm like, she's got to have done other stuff because she's just too good at what she does. So I kind of looked into the website and everything on what she's done in the past and what she's currently doing. And apparently she's an Emmy Award-winning science correspondent. She's been on the Henry Ford's Innovation Nation, and she's the host of Did I Mention Invention, which is on the CW. She appears on Netflix's science series Brainchild, and she's on the Science Channel's How to Build Everything. And she's the co-host of In the Wild. I mean, she's just with Adam Savage. She's with all of these. It's amazing. She's prolific. I didn't even realize it until this episode and doing a little bit of research on this one.
No, it's phenomenal. And you can tell she's a true professional. And not only is she professional, but she loves what she's doing. Zach mentioned kind of the passion. You hear these people for their specific area of study, but she has that passion for people that are these super researched and specialists in these areas. She has that same passion that they have for their areas that she has of learning what they do and about them and all the weird, crazy things about it.
I think my favorite thing about the whole show, and it just kind of encapsulates everything, is she keeps saying, ask smart people dumb questions. And it's great, because we're going in, we all are. I mean, most of us are going in not knowing about a specific field, and she's going to go talk to an expert, and inevitably we're going to have really dumb questions, but it's great. You got to ask the dumb questions so you can get some really interesting answers.
And what I love about that kind of attitude is she brings that 10x, I think, in the podcast, because you'll hear there's times where she wants to say something really goofy or make a joke and she holds off, but then she edits in like a sound clip or she does an aside and says something ridiculous. So I think she brings even more of like the kind of the playful nature of her podcast into all of the editing she does, which again, super professional quality, and it just adds so much to the podcast.
I will say that I have heard, I guess it's like a saying or just a general kind of knowledge thing, but a truly smart person, somebody who's an expert in their field, will take things that are complicated and bring them down to a level that everyone can understand. And someone that's like the type of person that annoys people is someone who makes things overcomplicated. And so I feel like her interview style, as well as the level of her guests, are really on that expert level where even if you have no clue what the topic is about at all, by the end, you are educated and it's super entertaining at the same time, which is the classic amazing combination for these types of things.
I also think she does a good job of asking questions that gives you good foundational knowledge of like, what's the base level of like, what's this about overall? And if I'm interested in this, how can I learn more and how can I get involved sometimes, or how can I be a part of this community? Because a lot of times these are communities around these specific areas because there's more than one person that's passionate about this thing. So
Yeah.
I think it's good because it makes it super approachable to everyone to listen to an episode and say, wow, this episode on lizards was amazing. What lizard should I get as my first pet? And how should I take care of it? And what should I pay attention to? I feel like those are the kinds of things that you always kind of come out of that either knowing the answers to or knowing where to go find those answers, which I think is great as well.
Yeah. And going into this specific episode, so she interviews the expert, which is Dr. Tom Volk, who is, I guess, a mycologist.
Mm-hmm.
And he's a professor. And okay, we just got to get it out of the way because I'm looking at the picture of him. He's holding in his hand this like handmade box. And what's in the box, guys?
What's in the box? Can we get a Seven reference going? It is his heart, his dissected, preserved heart that he used to have before his heart transplant.
And this is the part that I was listening to that I said, all right, I have to recommend this again, because this whole story was mind blowing. It has nothing to do with mycology. It has nothing to do with mushrooms or fungi or any of that. It's purely this guy's life story of how he had to have a heart transplant and how it changed his perspective on life. It almost reminded me of how astronauts go to space, and when they see the Earth from space, it changes their perspective. And it just really changes instantly how you view the world and how you interact with being a human being almost. And I just thought that whole thing was absolutely fascinating and amazing. So I was like, I got to recommend this. We got to talk about this.
Yeah, and I loved the way that he put his change of mentality, because he was talking about how like, I just don't worry about small things anymore. And I realized that everything is a small thing, because most things that we worry about, we fret about, we get angry about, are relatively small things in the grand scheme of life. And having, experienced what he experienced, it has completely changed his perspective on what's worth worrying about.
Yeah, I heard this life hack on essentially whenever you run into something and it starts to frustrate you, you start going through sevens. So is this going to matter in 7 seconds? Is this going to matter in 7 minutes? Is this going to matter in 7 days? Is this going to matter in 7 weeks? And so it gives you perspective on whether you should get upset about something or whether you should just let it roll off you. And it seems like he really does have a really cool spirit to him, where he lets Alie Ward holds his heart for the entire interview. I think they said it was like 30 minutes where she was just holding it, and he keeps it, and he showed it to a lot of people, and he has a special mushroom box that he keeps it in. But he really has like a crazy passion for learning. He also had some things where, like, because of his heart transplant and because of complications of a lot of different things, he had a lot of health issues. So there's some aspects of even mycology where he has to be careful because he's like immune suppressed. So just to have that combination of he's always kind of riding that edge of danger, but still just cares so deeply about it that it hasn't stopped him. Just a really cool guy and a really fun interview.
Yeah, and if you're at all interested in his story, he actually did a TED Talk. I think it's called A Change of Heart, which is a perfect like title for a TED Talk about getting a heart transplant. So I haven't watched the TED Talk, but I'm sure it's phenomenal. I'm probably going to go check that out. But if you're interested in that at all, I highly recommend going in and listening to him talk about it. It's phenomenal. The other thing that you mentioned just then, Zach, was he's kind of riding that line and living dangerously. I feel like with him especially, and I'm sure it's probably the case with a lot of people that are really into mushrooms and fungi, is they're a little off the beaten path, kind of do their own thing type of personality. And like he has like I think he had purple hair at the time. And if you look up pictures of him online, he's had blue hair and green hair and all these different things. So I think that kind of crowd probably has a really interesting kind of dynamic where it's people that are kind of like, hey, I'm going to do my own thing. I'm interested in fungi. Like this is not like a mainstream thing. So they kind of just go off the beaten path a little bit, which I think is great. I love those subcultures that have these really strong kind of communities to them and have really interesting personalities.
I will say this, after listening to this episode, and this is probably the best recommendation I can give it, I wanted to go on a mushroom foray, which we learned you're not foraging for mushrooms. It's a different thing. But here's the kicker, and here's why it's important. I do not like mushrooms. And it's not that I don't like them entirely. It's just I was never like one of those people that's saying, okay, I got a steak, please give me sauteed mushrooms, or please put mushrooms on my burger. If it's like in a stir fry or a part of the meal, that's one thing. But I was just never really interested in like, I want to go eat some mushrooms. But after hearing them talk about it and after hearing his kind of pitch on how fun it can be to go out looking for mushrooms, that sounds cool. It sounds like you learn how to like differentiate different species, and you have to learn how to where to find them and what trees they grow on. And there's a lot of like nature hiking and just generally being outdoors and foraging for food. And it's kind of cool. And I want to do it. And I want to go get a picnic basket so I can spread the spores around. There's just some interesting nuance to the hobby that after hearing them talk about on the show, I am interested.
1000% agree.
Yeah, and one of the things I looked up after listening to this episode was the nutritional facts around mushrooms. So they're usually really good for you. Most mushrooms have a lot of nutritional density to them, but there's a couple of really interesting studies I read about. There's one study that showed they took like 10 and 25% of their meat consumption and replaced it with mushrooms, and the people's markers for blood pressure, diabetes, and weight all improved drastically within a year. So it's one of those things where it's very filling and satiates you, and then it's also nutrient dense. So it's one of those like superfoods almost that if you can add it into your kind of daily food consumption, it really can benefit you in the long term. And there was also the other one that blew my mind. They showed that women that ate, I think it was, I don't know the amount, but if they ate like a certain amount of raw mushrooms every single day, 64% reduction in breast cancer. It was a study out of Perth in Australia.
That's an insane number.
That's very high.
Yeah.
So going off the same vein of what you're talking about, Zach, first of all, I love mushrooms, but him talking about them and even describing the taste of some of the ones that he's foraged and stuff like that, I think I realized something. I think that we've all, at restaurants or whatnot, had like 3 types of mushrooms ever. You know what I mean?
I would guess that it might be lower than that.
Yep.
It might be lower than 3.
I mean, I can think of like shiitake, whitecap, portobello, and there's another one. But like he was talking about,
super popular, but I think they're expensive. So
I've never seen them
unless you ate super.
I feel like I read somewhere that most of the types of mushrooms you have are different like growth stages of the same mushroom.
Really? I believe it. But so I'm actually very curious as to what some of the other flavors are. I mean, heck, he talked about one that you could literally cook it and it tastes like chicken. He's like, you would not be able to differentiate it from chicken, even texture wise. Yeah, or whatever you call it.
Chicken of the forest and hen of the forest. And he said one was greasy. I was like, that.
Is that? No, that was the chicken fat one, right?
Yeah.
It's like organs. I was like, no, thank you on that one.
No. There was a different one because it was a Patreon question that was, my boyfriend is a vegetarian, but he doesn't like mushrooms because of the texture. Is there a not mushroom texture mushroom?
I think it was chicken of the woods, not hen of the woods. Hen of the woods was a different one.
But there was
They have
one that
two.
did taste like
Yeah.
entrails, and that one seems
Not
maybe
great.
one I wouldn't.
Yeah, I
Really like.
don't know if I want that funky of a mushroom.
But I am interested to try morel mushrooms. I've never had them, but apparently they're like a delicacy. They were saying people ate so many of them that they became allergic to them, and that has to show you something about how good those are. So I want to try those for sure.
That reminds me, my dad at one point, we went to Alaska, and like there's just so much seafood there. We ate seafood for like every single meal for like 2 weeks. And he ended up becoming allergic to seafood for a while. And I didn't even know that was a thing, like that you could become allergic to something because you ate it so much until then. So when he mentioned that, it reminded me of my dad becoming allergic to seafood.
Yeah, the human body is absolutely ridiculous in some of those things that can happen.
It's very unfortunate that you can love something so much that you become allergic to it.
It's a cruel joke. So I've said it several different ways during our conversation, but I thought it was hilarious that the correct pronunciation of fungi can be fungi, 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 and fungi. Did I say fungi?
You did not.
Fungi is my favorite.
No, she said literally just say it however your brain wants to, and you're probably right because it's every single possible way. I think my favorite would be fungi because it sounds like bungee, but it's a mushroom.
I always say fungi.
I think that he even switched between different pronunciations during the interview. I think he said different pronunciations depending on what he felt good about at the time. So I just love that fact that there's no wrong way to pronounce it. And I feel like I feel like it meshes well with the culture of mycologists and mushroom hunters and that whole group of people. I think it just really just plays well with kind of their whole, the rules don't matter as much and kind of do their own thing and off the beaten path again. I love it. I just thought that was really interesting. And I always had heard people call it different funny things and wasn't sure what was right. So
it definitely meshes well with English. Doesn't have rules, except it has a lot of rules, but they don't matter sometimes. Make up your own mind. Figure out what you wanted to say. And that's it, right?
So then they also talked about a humongous fungus, which was, it's basically,
humongous.
It was humongous fungus, the largest organism ever found, like pretty much one of the biggest organisms in the world. And it is basically a fungus in Oregon that is 2,384 acres large. Yeah,
that is ridiculous.
So they said, to put it another way, it's 1,665 football fields. So I actually went on, this episode's show notes, which if you are interested in this at all, go to their show notes. They had like 20 or 40 links. It was like ridiculous. So many links to all this different stuff. So all of this amazing information. And so this is an article from Scientific American. And it's funny because they even quote Dr. Volk in here talking about this humongous fungus. And they were talking about how like before this, it was the blue whale was the largest organism. And this is like a million times larger than the blue whale. Yeah. And then they also talked about, the crazy thing about the aspen trees, which he mentioned on this.
Oh yeah, the Pango Grove.
Yeah, that's crazy. I had no idea that it was like clones of the same tree. I'd never heard that. I'd never heard.
Mind blowing.
I
want to know what the scientists felt like when they figured that out. When they saw like these trees seem very similar because it's large. Yeah, we'll throw a picture of the grove in the show notes. If I'm sure they have one too, but it is a really large. If I walked into it, I would think, oh, it's a forest. It's one tree. They think it has a connected root system, and it's literally all clones. And so it's just mind blowing how nature reacts sometimes, and how it'll get really specific to how it can survive and do something really interesting.
The other thing that I loved, and I had no idea was the case before, is that the mushroom that you see is the mushroom's wiener.
Okay. This led to my most uncomfortable moment on this show. Her describing, it's like if you wore a full latex bodysuit that was crotchless. She made me visualize that. I was not mentally prepared to have to deal with that, but I did, and it ruined my moment.
Yeah,
it was only for a second though.
No, it wasn't for a second for me. Every single time that she mentioned mushrooms, I just visualized like someone laying on the ground, and that's all you could see was the mushroom sticking out of the ground. It was disturbing.
Kirk still hasn't stopped thinking about it. He's
the worst.
He's gonna think about it all day.
Yeah, and just she kept calling them Jennies. She's like, "Oh yeah, the fungus
Jennies."
And it just
that's my wife's name, by the way.
Yes.
So I did not like that.
No, it was super funny, but yeah, I was very disturbed because she painted a picture in my mind that I was not ready for, and it definitely it was impactful is maybe a way to describe it.
Yeah, I learned that I really love eating fungi wieners.
Yep, apparently I do too. So, on a light note, similar to that, she talked about basically all these crazy names that they've given to mushrooms. And we already played this game before, which is the whole like indie band or firework. Well, inspired by her, I decided to make a game called Indie Band or Mushroom. All right, so I'm going to list these. Let's do these pretty quick. Sea anemone, Josh.
Question, is that an enemy and you pronounced it wrong, or is it spelled wrong?
I like how he's going to throw shade on this question.
Zach, answer.
Mushroom.
You're right. It is a mushroom. 1 point for Zach.
Heyo.
Anothello. Josh.
Indie band.
Correct. 1 Josh, 1 Zach. Jonesetta. Josh.
Mushroom.
It's an indie band. Dog Stinkhorn. Zach.
Mushroom.
Nice. Beard Tooth.
Mushroom.
Oh, he didn't.
Zach,
he
Zach,
cheated.
you buzzed in.
No, it's mushroom.
Zach's got 3. Josh has 1.
Heyo.
Josh, you always lose these games because you cheat. You did this last time too.
No, I didn't. I crushed the firework or indie band one. I went for like 16 for 17.
Echo Belly.
See?
Josh.
That's an indie band.
You're right. It is an indie band. Ghostwood. Zach.
Mushroom.
That is an indie band.
Oh, no.
This is actually harder than the fireworks for some reason.
It is. It's much more difficult. No, and when she was listing them on the episode, there was some of them that was like, that is totally like an indie band name.
I got 2 more. I don't remember what the score was anymore. It doesn't matter.
I had like 30 points, I think.
Okay, that's what I thought. Sky Blue.
That's a mushroom.
Zach.
Indie band.
It's a mushroom.
Yes.
No.
And last but not least, Bleeding Tooth. Go ahead, Josh.
That is a mushroom.
That is a mushroom, but that one would be such a good indie band name. You got to admit it. Bleeding Tooth.
Yeah.
It definitely is. There was one that she listed that was called like Death Angel or something. I was like, that is a metal band all day.
Yeah.
And then I've seen like they had a picture for each one of these mushroom names, and some of these are freaking ridiculous. There was one that was called like the brain mushroom, and it looked exactly like a human brain. It was very disturbing. But yep, it's a fun game. That's funny. That was actually more difficult than the fireworks even.
It's way more difficult. Yeah. There was a lot of really awesome band names that were also mushroom names.
On top of the ridiculous names that have been given to mushrooms, they talked at length, but very carefully about the hallucinogenic properties of a lot of mushrooms. Mm-hmm. And one of my favorite parts about that discussion was talking about how the reindeers go every year and like forage for these mushrooms they just want to trip balls, and they'll just go like crazy on these mushrooms to the point where it's a tradition for the native people in that area to actually drink the deer urine from the reindeer for them to trip balls. It was nuts.
Yeah. The reindeer are tripping so hard that their urine is also a hallucinogen.
And the thing that
really liked.
Mind, go ahead, Zach.
I also really liked the comparison to where we got the whole Santa Claus and reindeer and elves and stuff is very hallucinogenic from where like the origins were. And it's just really funny to see how it's evolved into something different. And I think it's an amalgamation of a lot of things, because there was also St. Nicholas and things like that. But if you start looking at like flying reindeer and people bringing you gifts and things like that, they describe it in this region where the reindeer are getting super high as essentially it's like a shaman is bringing you like a wish It's much more spiritual and different than what I was expecting.
Yeah, no, I loved it.
It's just it all ties in so perfectly because it's a red and white mushroom, and there's reindeers in the area, and they're eating the mushrooms already. So they're like, oh, the reindeers are flying, and there's a guy being pulled by a sled of all these reindeers, and he's kind of crazy too. So it's this whole just story. It's like a fairy tale almost, but it's based on reality, which a lot of fairy tales have been before. So it's it's crazy. That blew my mind as well.
I definitely thought it was funny to imagine Santa and all his reindeers just being tripping really hard.
I did imagine the reindeers be like, dude, I feel like I'm flying right now.
That's exactly it.
Sounds like, yeah. So it's just, and then you get down to reality, and there's some dude getting pulled by like one really high reindeer.
Yep, and he's drinking its pee.
It does kind of kill the Christmas story for you, though.
No, it makes
I'll
Christmas
say that,
better.
but
it's a much better mental picture than I had earlier. So that's
sure. It does make it much more interesting. And they also talked a little about psilocybin and some of the research on it. And obviously, Tom Volk is more on the side of that should not be Schedule 1. And he also recognized essentially that there is a lot of research going into it right now. And there is potential in the future for it to be something that it's beneficial, and it's something where you can find through research and through acceptance of the medical community and like losing the stigma, we can find some really effective treatments for it, because we've seen and we've talked about multiple times on I think it was actually on the PDS, not on Todd's, but I think maybe both, about the potential mental health benefits of psilocybin treatment. And so they get a little bit onto that stuff. So it's interesting because the diversity of just fungi in general is really complex and nuanced. And there's a wide variety, because they talk about black mold. They talk about stuff that's incredibly poisonous, because one of the patron questions was, I want fairy gardens in my yard, or fairy rings, yes, I think is what they're called, because essentially it'll just be like almost a perfect circle of mushrooms, and they called those fairy rings because that was the mythology around it was where fairies would dance around, and that's why it's a perfect circle. And he mentioned that in general, the most common type of that is very toxic, and I think he said it causes you to have projectile diarrhea and vomiting at the same time
simultaneously.
And it's not he says it's not as fun as it sounds. I was like, okay, dude. but it's just funny because they kind of just touch on such a wide variety, from like eating them to trying to go forage them to what's poisonous to how can you get involved in a club. And there's just such a wide variety of stuff that you really leave this conversation having a really kind of deep picture of mycology from a not just from like a scholarly perspective, but more just you've picked up information in a way that you weren't expecting, at least for me.
Yeah, no, and that's what you feel on every single episode of Ologies, and why I've continued to listen to it, because I'm one of those people that likes to learn about weird things that are kind of, it's kind of like the nuances of life and the nuances of things going on in the world. And if you look close enough at something and research something enough, almost everything will become interesting once you look at it long enough and really dive into it. And so that's what this show is about for me. It really shows you how ordinary things can become extraordinary through just learning more about it. And again, I can't recommend this show enough. We had to do another episode of it because just it's so good. Dr. Volk is a fascinating person. Just everything about this show and this episode in general are just, I can't say enough good things. So go out and listen to it. Find an episode you're interested in, and find one you're not interested in, and you will be by the end. I guarantee it.
Yeah, just listen to it.
Yeah, and I mean, heck, there's a lot of interesting stuff they mentioned just in this episode that we haven't even had a chance to talk about. So that's how good these shows are, and how much we learned, and how much you would learn if you listen to them. Yeah, great show.
Before we get into this week's recommendation, I'd like to recommend you guys a book. So I recently read Neuromancer, which is a classic cyberpunk book by William Gibson. It's a phenomenal book, and if you're interested in the book and you have a long commute, check out Audible. You can go on audible.com and you can get a free trial of Audible, and you can get a free book, and you can grab Neuromancer. It's there available on audible.com. And from that, you can listen to it on your drive and throw it into your podcast rotation, have a little bit of story in there as well. This book is phenomenal. It's like,
just go to audibletrial.com/PDS, and I'll have the link in the show notes as well. But what's that book about?
It's crazy because it's very like, he does a lot of visual storytelling where there's like crazy visuals going on in a book, which is kind of hard to kind of picture until you read it. So there's a lot of visual stuff. They're like doing drugs. It's like a dystopian future. They're doing hacking stuff. There's AI. It's crazy. It's really, really interesting. If you like The Matrix, it's kind of like that. They say that's one of the books that inspired The Matrix. So definitely check it out if you're interested in cyberpunk at all. It's phenomenal.
It just reminds me of our D&D that we used to play. So that's kind of exciting.
Yeah.
Yeah, that one that we were kind of like creating as we went was fun.
That was fun.
But yeah, no, it sounds good. And yeah, you can get a free book. You can get a free month. It's real easy, and we have the link in the show notes.
With the link in the show notes, you can actually go into your podcast catcher, click the button, and it'll bring up the show notes. You can click the link to audible.com with our link on it and go and get your free trial. Easy peasy, 1, 2, 3. Start listening right away.
ABC. All right, so next week's recommendation is another revisited show, and it is 20,000 Hertz. And the specific show that I want to, or episode that I want to recommend is The Booge.
The Booge.
The Booge. So this episode,
how do you spell that?
I think it's BOOJ.
I don't know. I think there's like 6 more O's.
Yep, there's 38 O's.
Booge.
Does it need to be bassy? The Booge.
So what this episode is actually about, and it's actually very, very interesting and intriguing, is it's about like the science of making a movie trailer, because apparently there has been a lot of different models of movie trailers, and they've kind of become very stereotypical because
of Christopher Nolan
over time. And like we're now in the booge era, whereas like before,
the booge the Christopher Nolan noise, you know what I mean?
Probably.
Like Inception,
yes,
Batman Begins,
that.
Yeah,
pretty much.
Oh.
Yeah, no, that's definitely it. But it's in almost every single one right now. But before that, it was the guy that was like, in a world, like, so that was a thing for a while, and before that there was something else. So it's a very in-depth look of what like movie trailers have kind of evolved into and where they might go. It's a great show.
Sounds
My
great.
interest is piqued.
You'll never listen to a movie trailer or watch a movie trailer again and not be like, hey, this is like a formula that they used. Like it's awesome.
Oh, I have a video that I'm guaranteeing I'm going to talk about, because there's one that's just really leans into making fun of the whole, like, we're going to put like blow in like every single 7 seconds of the movie trailer.
Spoiler alert, I think they might mention that video in here.
Oh, okay. Yeah, there we go then.
But yeah, so that's 20,000 Hertz, and the episode is The Booge.
All right, guys. Well, thank you so much for listening. And remember,
there's always more to discover.
Thank you for listening to the Podcast Discovery Show. We have a few things we'd like to tell you. First, we would love to hear from you on Twitter at the PDS Official, or in our Facebook group, the Podcast Discovery Club.
Secondly, leaving a rating or review on iTunes helps tremendously in giving us visibility, and also visibility to the podcast that we recommend. You can also check out our Patreon page to get exclusive bloopers, old episode archives, and other exclusive content while supporting the show.
Finally, seriously, get in touch. We'd love to hear from you about what you love about podcasts, and thank you for being a part of all of the things that we do.
This was a podcast from the Podfix Network. You can check out more shows like it at podfixnetwork.com.